Hey, Doooovid here with Charles Moscowitz. Talk about his latest book. So most people, who follow Doooovid or my content are familiar with Charles Moscowitz. We've been doing a Thursday on his channel for months now, almost like half a year. Call it Partners in Torah. He was on my channel a few months ago when he came out with his first book on God is God, which was an interesting conversation, and props to Charles for using his time during the lockdown wisely and taking it seriously and putting out books. So Charles' new book is called, I'm going to do a screen share here, is The Satanic Conspiracy, The Specter Haunting Mankind, which is kind of like a pamphlet, 52 pages or like 100 pages. It's here on Amazon. The link is in the description. So I'm going to hand it over to Charles. I assume most people know who he is, but just in case we get a few new viewers, I suggested he do whatever bio he wants and whatever introduction Charles wants to say to why he wrote this book, what he wants people to get out of it. And then I'm going to read from the introduction, and hopefully we'll go chapter by chapter, main points. It's a very interesting topic, and let Charles explain some things, and I'll question him on some things that he said or didn't say, based on some of my scholarship. So welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Doooovid. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm the author of over 20 books, and I've been doing public commentary, talk radio, off and on for the past 20 years. I ran for office in 2004 against Barney Frank here in Massachusetts as a congressional race. And generally speaking, my contribution to public life has been my commentary, my books, my broadcasting. And since the pandemic, I've committed myself to writing these short books, these pamphlets, and I'm averaging maybe one every month and a half. This is the fifth in a series. And the first one dealt with the existence of the creator of the universe, blessed be he, the lawgiver, that being God, what we call God. And this one is sort of the countermeasure to that. This is Satan, the satanic conspiracy, the satanic influence on society. So, excuse me. So I start out with a simple exposition that I believe proves that God exists. And I use a mathematical formula to do that, one that's easily understood. And once I establish that principle, I then take a look at what therefore then is Satan or the satanic influence. And, how can that be in a world that was created by a loving God? That we could have evil, that we could have an evil aspect. And I think that my general thesis is based upon admittedly a loose, but nevertheless, I think a fairly well-grounded understanding in the Jewish concept of Satan, which differs from the Christian concept, even though it cross-pollinates with it and shares a great deal with it, and both coming from the same root, which is the Torah. But we don't, in Judaism, it's not an anthropomorphic understanding of Satan. It's more an understanding of what's called the Yetzer Hara, the evil influence, the evil that exists in the vacuum of good, the falsity, the artificiality that exists as a contradiction to that which is true and that which is real. That if you accept the premise that God created the universe, which is, of course, the very basis of the entire Jewish construct, it's the very first sentence in the Torah, then there is satanic elements when we deny that existence, when we deny that which is true and that which is real, and when we deny that which is good. And it's a very elaborate and complex question in terms of identifying that which is good and contrasting it to that which is evil, or that which is true, in contrast to that which is unnatural, that's false. We can't know all of it because we're not God. Only God knows all. But we can know a lot, and we can use our basic instincts. We could use prayer. We could use knowledge. We could use reason. We could use education to understand that which is good, to understand that which is beneficial to advancing our own individual lives, but also our societies, and to contrast that which is false, elements and ideas that are meant to slow down and retard and reverse the good by use of the lie. And in a sense, the Judeo understanding is similar to the Christian understanding in that the satanic influence represents the lie. It represents that which is untrue, unnatural, and that it is our obligation as living individuals, as images of God, because after all, the book of Genesis tells us that God created men and women in his image. And it does, by the way, say women equally. It is our obligation to identify that which is good and contrast it with that which is evil as a way of slowing down, retarding, reducing, diminishing the satanic influence. And when we don't do that, the satanic influence can become, and historically has become, predominant in many different situations. And I look at history in that regard. I look at what are the best means of self-governance for us to ensure that we have a maximum ability to counter evil and identify the good. And I go through examples of where the evil influence, the Sahara, the satanic influence, has manifested itself, how it operates, and eventually how it is operating today in our world. And I would argue, in a sense, I finished the book by pointing out that that influence is more dangerous and more deadly today than it's ever been in history because of modern technologies, things like transhumanism and artificial intelligence and technologies that can be used in the hands of satanically oriented people and groups can be used to promote this artificial and, quite frankly, this satanic agenda. So I hope that my short book here offers people an opportunity to identify the satanic influence both in their own lives and in their societies, and that it gives us enough courage to step out and identify it when we see it. So that's it in a nutshell of it.
Yes, I just have the e-copy here. Is it a 100-page book or is it a 50-page book?
It's well, here I have the book right here. By the way, this is it is 52 pages. It's a short book. I generally am keeping my pamphlets brief because I want them to be, I'm churning them out and I want it to be easy to digest. In fact, my most recent pamphlet, which I hope to have done by the end of the summer, it's called The Blue Anon Conspiracy. I think that speaks for itself. Anyway.
Yes, so I read your book actually, 3 times over the last week and a half since I got my copy, and it's pretty interesting, and it's such a huge topic. I mean, if someone wanted to write the history of Satan, it could probably be just in Judaism, could probably be a 10-volume encyclopedic, let alone in world traditions. I mean, you cover kind of like a history, and from a cosmology point of view, that I had my debate last week on consciousness versus physicalism, that there's a lot of metaphysical, cosmological precursors that, from a more kind of like science of karma point of view, are going to be derivative of how Satan operates. Like, is there a dualistic realm of a material and a spiritual? And does Satan exist in the material or the spiritual realm? And in the cosmology of how the world was created, when does Satan come about. And obviously the Zohar and the Talmud, and you didn't even quote like Job, some of the most famous probably passages in Jewish literature about Satan, and you probably could write a whole pamphlet just on Job and the role of the Satan in Job. But very interesting, and is that if I were writing a book or researching the subject, I probably would have focused more on what I would call like comparative karmatic dualistic systems of how the interplay of the spiritual and the physical, and how does Satan fit into the picture, and you do go quite a bit into the concept of the Yetzer Hara. So let me just start reading from Charles' book, straight to his words, and we'll get a little comment on that, and so people will get a feel for what he's talking about, and then maybe we talk about it a little more, so people who want to know more about the subject, know like where to look, or some of the deeper thoughts that are really behind this topic.
Okay.
So the Satanic Conspiracy, a specter haunting mankind. Charles Moscowitz. The thesis of this book, The Satanic Conspiracy, is that a permanent satanic conspiracy has existed and continues to exist within our society, one by which a cabal of elites work both together and separately, formally and informally, towards subverting that which is true and good. I present a philosophical and religious case that there is an adversary to God and nature that, when embraced by individuals and groups, seek to subvert creation, natural law, society, and reason. In my book, God is God, I argue that God is one, that God is good, that God is love, that God is real, and that God is the singular supernatural source of reason and truth. I surmise that God is the creator of the universe, and as such, that God is the creator of all things that are true and that are real, both in corporeal, and the abstract sense. Thus, God is the creator of all things and the giver of the laws of nature, including the natural laws of man. Yet in this book, about what I contend is a satanic conspiracy. I intend to raise age-old questions such as, if God is the creator and if God is love, then why is there evil in the world? If God is the creator and there's no other God than God, then did therefore God create evil, or is evil an adversary to God? If evil is an adversary to God, then would this not contradict the idea of the oneness of the loving God? I will raise such questions as to why it seems evil is, at least by appearance, so often rewarded. I will attempt to tackle paradoxical questions such as how Satan, the evil inclination, and how manifestations of Satan exist in a world that is created by a loving God. I will sketch a brief chronology of individuals and groups that wittingly or unwittingly embraced a satanic conspiracy to subvert God and to subvert the good. I will attempt to illustrate the unnaturalness of satanic evil and sketch its chronology from antiquity to modern times, while analyzing and evaluating the satanic influence today and its complex manifestations. I will attempt to prove that Satan, or whatever name we might affix to the embodiment of evil, is enthroned when imperfect human beings in society allow evil to hold sway, and that Satan is a force, when not challenged, that threatens the social order as well as the personal life of the individual. I will contrast the satanic influence with that of the good, while illustrating the consequences to individuals and to society of the embrace of both the good Almighty God and the consequences that are countervailing embrace of Satan.
Thank you, Doooovid. You've read the entire introduction forward. Look, what we're talking about, and maybe I could have even put this in the title, is a satanic conspiracy against God. That there is a part of our nature that seems to almost be hidebound within us, that seeks to rebel against, overthrow, challenge God, and as such, to challenge reality, to challenge existence. It goes back to the very first passages in the Torah, the Garden of Eden, and the temptation on the part of Adam and Eve to partake of the fruit of the tree of life that God told them not to do. By doing that, they engaged in the first rebellion against God, the first satanic act. The serpent represents a satanic manifestation. And that what they were trying to do by partaking of that forbidden fruit was they were trying to overthrow God in heaven. We can know all things. We can know all. We can know good and evil. We can know everything. In other words, they could become perfect. Only God knows everything. There's a separation. When God created the universe, the mind of God separated himself or herself, whatever, from other things. It's a creation. It's not the created. The universe, the earth, man, we're not God. God is God. We are an image of God in the case of men and women, but all of existence is separated from God, and yet is part of God, because ultimately God is all. Nevertheless, this was an attempt by the progenitors of all of us, Adam and Eve, the father and the mother of all man, to try to overthrow God and become God. And as such, they engaged in a satanic act that has been acted out in every generation ever since. Whittaker Chambers, I think you notice I mentioned him. He is the author of his autobiography, Witness. He had been an American communist in the 1930s. He was working for Stalin. He eventually blew the whistle on the people he was handling within the FDR administration, because he couldn't, first of all, because he became a Christian, but secondly, because he had, the tipping point for him was when Stalin allied with Hitler, and he realized that that was a bridge too far, and he had to alert the country to this evil. And he writes in the introduction to his book that the act of Adam and Eve, when they partook of the forbidden fruit, was the first, in a sense, it's the second oldest religion, and it was the first communist revolution. It was the first attempt by human beings to get rid of God, to overthrow God, and to create their own earthly secular utopia by seizing the power to know all. And it was a conspiracy, because they got together and they said, we're going to do this, and we're not going to tell God. So, and that's what a conspiracy is. It's when two or more people get together in secret and they conspire to overthrow nature and nature's God, as Jefferson might have said. And ever since then, every generation has had this phenomena. And it usually takes place amongst people who are quite witting and quite conscious in their effort to do this, and who are powerful and who use their power to fool and subvert and convince as many of the rest of us as they can that their agenda is right, that we don't need to believe in a God as the primary, as the only source of sovereignty. We can believe in man. It's Whittaker Chambers referred to it as a war between God and man, with the communist idea in that case representing man. So, I would argue that it's a conspiracy. I do argue in the book that it's a conspiracy that has advanced in every generation through secret societies, because it's one that cannot be done out in the open. If it were, we would reject it. So it has to be done in secret. This isn't a condemnation of all secret societies. There are some good ones. We don't know what's going on in them because they're secret, but we know some things about them. And we know that in many cases, they have tried to subvert the better aspect of human nature, the better aspect of reality, the better aspect of objective moral standards that exist outside of human manipulation. And that they have become, in recent, probably this past century, enthroned in this country. And they have mainly controlled much of the power nexuses in this country. So that's my argument.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's really a huge topic, and it's interesting. Like, a lot of the ideas that are most interesting to me, you only briefly covering, you described the Yetzer Hara, which is the most common term in Jewish literature, which is just the inclination to bad. And in Talmudic folklore, it's actually a dispute among Kabbalists, but generally, when a kid is born, they have a Yetzer Hara until we die. Every 24/7 of every second of our life is this push that pushes us to do bad, to do the wrong thing. Like it says in Psalms, like all day I dream of sin, and in my heart is cold, or the various language that we say in our prayers, versus an actual Satan, which I mentioned, like Job. There is various allusions or actual straight out verses in the Hebrew prophets that talk about this evil force, Satan, as talking with God, like in the book of Job, or as an angel, or as a force. And then later there's the Kabbalists and the philosophers that some will say that basically the material realm is Satan. It is that the nature of the material realm is a drive towards sinful behavior, and the spiritual realm is generally bent towards good. So Satan, the Yetzer Hara, is the drive towards materialism and rejecting God. That is just a force that the Zohar gives the example of, God forbid, the harlot that the king uses to test his son's fidelity. That what role does the harlot play to the king in testing his son's fidelity? It's generally, that's the comparison that saying that it's a service of God, and philosophically, so because we get free will, and so that we could get rewarded, that you have a complicated system that you need this Yetzer Hara in some sort of test in order to get the reward, like the Ramchal or Moshe Chaim Luzzato's famous explanations just of the greater cosmology of Judaism, that it's better to get reward that one deserves. I think in the Hebrew terms referred to as the bread of the poor man. So if you get rewarded without earning it, it is not the same as having earned the reward. So ultimately creating the Satan, the desire for evil, is a greater kindness by God. And I mean, and you touch on some of the greater cosmology, and I like giving the Greeks the Epicurean trilemma, because all cultures have basically thought about these issues, and you turn your focus largely then to called conspiracies, where you have a cabal of people that are purposely coordinating within a negative force. Yes. And you don't touch too much on free will, but so sometimes you could look at it like from an idolatry perspective, that it's not the person who's doing it, it's a negative force, and that Satan acts through people. And so when evil things need to be done, this evil force needs to possess someone to do it on behalf of evilness, or that it's an aspect of free will where people just desire bad things and want to sin and do sinful behavior, or want to be separate from God and be our own entities, the essential rebellion to reject God in order that I could just do whatever I want in theory. And then you have a cabal of people that coordinate in order to be successful in sin, that or to acquire power or various things. So we talk about that more. Let me read this super chat before it disappears. Brundle Ricardo, long time in our chat, former alt writer, not clear where his what he's doing, but $9.99, appreciate that. What does Chuck think about the Noahide laws? Does he believe that the Christian view of Jesus qualifies as idolatry? If not, why not? And I was going to ask you about the Noahide laws. We'll put that off till when we get to Freemasonry and the Illuminati, as if Freemasonry in general is a Noahide movement. So if you want to answer briefly the question, then maybe we'll return to the Noahide-ism when we get to the section of your book on the Freemasonry and Illuminati.
Okay. Well, I just will briefly note that when Adam and Eve had committed their sin, God banned them and banished them from the Garden of Eden. And I think at that point, all of humanity is surrounded by sin and temptation and satanic influence, both within us and around us. And I think that that's consistent with this idea of the Yetzer Hara.
Just say, me and my rabbi used to say constantly to each other, to help each other, the quote from the Talmud is like, never sleeps, never takes a vacation, and every time you beat it, it comes back stronger. And that's, the expression the Talmud uses about the Yetzer Hara, means saying there is no way to beat it. It's always with you.
Exactly.
And, so it's an important concept. Is that different than Satan, or is Satan just when the Yetzer Hara wins, or in the deeper cosmology and metaphysics of how to understand that?
It's everywhere. And the thing is that this is why we need to and ought to and do develop individual character. We develop a purpose. We develop we struggle with an attempt to try to identify and understand these temptations and these concepts. And it doesn't mean that we can't partake in the world. It means that we need to operate in a condition of judgment and reason. God, when he created men and women, and the one factor that gave us a soul and that separated us from the animal kingdom, the moment when we became images of God, was the moment we were able to engage in reason, that we were able to assimilate knowledge, accumulate knowledge, and build on knowledge, and understand that we can identify the nature of things. The first command that God gave to Adam, I think even before Eve, was that you are to name the creatures of the universe, of the world, by name, use of language. Our ability to use language is something that burst forth. And by the way, I think that's quite scientific to say that, because I actually asked that question of Noam Chomsky when I had him on my show, and he's seen as one of America's preeminent linguists. And he said that that's his basic theory as well, that it didn't evolve, it simply happened, that we were able to use language to identify things. And once we could do that and we could use reason, we could then begin to write and read and all of the various tools that are associated with language to increase our knowledge, to improve our lives, and to understand that which is good and contrast it with evil. So we have the outward manifestations, but we also have the inward character element in each of us to get through our life and to resist or to put into context the sinful temptations. And we make those kinds of decisions every day. You make those, we all are dealing with a balance of good and evil, of virtue and sin. It's a very complex question. But where the satanic influence really manifests itself in the form of, as I say, these secret societies, is when they start to call evil good, when they start to call sin virtue, and they convince themselves of this, or they launch this marketing campaign to convince everyone else of it. Sin is one thing, but if you're going to pretend that sin is good and that there's no such thing as evil, that's when you have a more clear and dangerous manifestation of Satan on earth. That it is our ability as rational human beings, the use of logic. I mean, the Greek term for this is logos, the development of a society based on order and reason and the ability to identify truths, that we can begin to overcome these temptations, or at least mitigate them and put them into a context where we can function as free and moral people and free and moral societies. So the problem comes about when the element of secrecy, which is where Satan operates best, in the shadows, behind closed doors, convinces us that we're crazy, basically, that everything that is evil, in fact, is good, that there's no such thing as good. There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as God. So, but you're asking about the Noahide covenant?
Well, let's get back to that when we talk about Freemasonry, because mine, to say interpret Freemasonry as a Noahide movement. But let me just read a second from your book to see the words that you use. Satan does not exist in nature per se, but Satan emerges out of the dark side of man's free will. Satan lurks in the shadows when good is absent. Satan, while hiding his countenance from man, will emerge when we refuse to recognize the good, and when, even after we do recognize the good, we consciously and deliberately choose evil. Free will tempts us to take advantage of others, to violate the natural rights of others by means of force or deception in order to gain advantages for ourselves. That is likewise the case collectively when we employ our organizations and our nations towards evil intent and actions. Indeed, the crowd, the mob, the collective is more easily brought under the spell of Satan, as the individual, when operating as part of the mob, is more likely to subsume the code of morality, of personal conscience, and the independent thought in favor of the warm and comforting sensation of a cheap acceptance and easy sovereignty tend to be replaced experience when the individual places him or herself at the service of the mob, and by doing so the individual comprises the faculty of objective reason, which tends to be replaced by emotion and by the excesses that are associated with the sensate. And then you go on to talk about the founding of America and the view that you interpret to be the majority of the founders of America towards evil, from which is a subject Charles has reasonable amount of expertise in, and from there you talk about the Jewish conception of Satan, and you mentioned the Shabbatite Tzvi movement, which we've talked about at length in previous podcasts, or something like ISIS to till the New Age Satan, and it's interesting if you look at it's said that Satan as collectively like a force that exists outside of the material realm that pushes people to do bad, or even say the material realm itself pushing people to do bad. That you could look at Judaism in some understandings that basically we have to do the rituals and believe these things, because if not, the material realm in and of itself will cause people to do the wrong thing, and that's actually the natural condition. Is like the Talmud said, man is born a wild ass, and the child's natural way is as an animal, and if a person doesn't refine their character, the natural tendency is to be an animal. Ignorance is the natural condition. And but if you say no, there's an added force besides the natural condition of ignorance, and the forces of the material realm and the basic lusts and desires of the human, that there's an added external force that causes people to be bad for basically no other reason than being bad, which is disputed among scholars, even with Judaism, whether there is such a thing. Like God hardened Paro's heart, but is there theoretically this added extra force besides the normal harsh condition of the material realm that causes people to be bad, or is it just general lust, honor, and the typical character faults that we see in people?
I wonder if there's an extra force. I mean, obviously, I have no idea. I mean, I would tend to think that there probably is, but I think that if you look at, again, the nature of the man and the woman as created in the image of God, which is the first sentence of right in the very beginning of the book of Genesis, and which, by the way, is also the founding principle of the American Republic. It is, if there's one thing that could be described as an American philosophy, it is this idea that sovereignty comes from God and not from the state, that we are individuals, each one of us, every man, every woman is created equal, and that we are endowed by the Creator, not by the state, with inalienable elements of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, of life. And that as such, things that are meant to subvert the consciousness of the individual, sovereign individual under God, using reason, accepting responsibility, dealing with the consequences of their own irrationality, that movements and groups and philosophies that tend to try to subvert this in the name of promoting collectivism are anti-human and as such are satanic. Now, the whole saga and history of the development of human civilization is the struggle to know who we are as individuals under God, that to understand the limited but very real element of sovereignty that every individual is granted as an image of God, and that we are to overcome the tendency toward collectivism, the tendency toward the mob. I mean, Frederick Engels, who was the chief financier of Karl Marx, talked about this when he made reference to primitive socialism, that ancient man was collectivist. We were not yet at a spiritual point. We were not yet at a consciousness point where we could get out of that mob existence and we could start to become individuals. I mean, this is the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, really. This is the agenda of the idol worshiping that is so condemned in the Torah, and that was such great temptation for the Israelites all the way up till the time of the Babylonian captivity. That the idol worship, the graven image, was, first of all, it was false. It was set up by the state. It didn't exist. It was something that was controlled by a state that sought to promote collectivism through fear and through tactics of magic, if you will, magic language or whatever they were doing, or various rituals. And that the idea was that you were supposed to subsume your individual consciousness, your understanding that as an individual you derive your sovereignty from God and not from the state. And you instead were supposed to submit to this graven image, this man-made image that was false and that was, promoting collectivism. So, the human saga, as I mentioned, it is an ongoing process of becoming conscious of who we are as sovereign individuals under God. It is the basic of the American system of government. And I use America as an example of the very best flowering of this idea, that we derive our sovereignty from the Creator and not from the state, not from the collective, not from the mob. Because if you start to get wrapped up in a mob and you're manipulated by these, frankly, secret societies that use tactics to rev you up and make you want to join the mob, then you surrender not only your consciousness, but you surrender objective, separate, and sovereign elements of morality. Morality goes out the window in a mob because everything becomes a group consciousness, which is false, as opposed to the individual consciousness.
Yes, obviously, so we could talk about this, forever. But so we've been focusing, the first part of the book, which is more the metaphysical, the philosophical, cosmological structure for how Satan operates, how there is a negative impulses, the various paradoxical questions the sages have been asking since antiquity, to where then you turn the focus, so in the new age of Satan, and you talk about movements that you interpret, saying mass movements in history that changed civilization, which you interpret for the negative, and interpret to this principle of satanic forces getting a grip on man, then a group of men, and slowly spreading to even bring down society or cause war and mass tragedy. And you mentioned the communists, and so let me just mention here someone in the chat who is calling himself Krangs wanted me to ask if you are familiar with the works of Marvin Antelman, which I told him obviously you are, and you asked
Yes.
about Barry Charmish to eliminate the opiate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told him I'm pretty sure that you I definitely Marvin Antelman. You're always quoting him.
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
And so we'll get to Brundle wanted to push you a little bit like on the Noahide or Jesus, but I don't know how much topical that is to if you say that it is if you would say that that idol worship is idol worship, is the drive to idol worship satanic? That or are you saying it's a separate drive, or is it going to come down to everything bad that any person ever wants to do? It's always Satan. Or say no, there's multiple different forces, and there's satanic forces, but that has nothing to do with some independent force that causes people to worship idols or and any of the other sins that are common in man. So these are very complicated metaphysical questions. And I mean, there's scriptures, there's basic overviews, but even among Jewish sages, Catholic sages, there's huge varieties in opinions on these metaphysical issues. But so let's turn it to how you're talking about like communism in general. A guy calls himself Oswald Spangler in my chat, listens to the program regularly, and wanted to hear your thoughts on communism. And so if you go through that example in your book as how satanic forces could and it's an interesting parallel if you're considering it. Are you essentially saying the same thing that E. Michael Jones is in the Jewish revolutionary spirit, but you're saying that what he would classify, God forbid, is maybe something even anti-Jewish? That you're saying that he is accurate in the sense, but he mislabeled it as a Jewish revolutionary spirit in terms of a satanic force. But it is interesting to draw a parallel between your work and E. Michael Jones.
Okay, I mean, look, I think that E. Michael Jones is half right. I've interviewed him many times. I admire his work, but I think he's dead wrong on focusing on the Jews. I mean, I think that his idea that there is a satanic influence and in the world that seeks to overthrow order, that seeks to overthrow what he calls logos, is right. I mean, it happened every generation, all the way from Adam and Eve. I think it's the same impetus, the same drive that does tend to want to overthrow Judaism and Christianity, and that it wants to overthrow that which is good, societies which are good. His premise is that Judaism is to blame because the Jewish people did not accept Jesus as the Messiah. I don't think so. I mean, with all respect to Jesus as probably the greatest man who ever lived, and I am a Jew who admires Jesus, because Jesus brought into the world in a way that the rabbis didn't, an advancement in the understanding of the logos of the Torah. Christianity has completely embraced the Old Testament, what they call the Old Testament, what we call the Torah and the Tanakh, in all of its moral and ethical principles. This is look, I mean, as a Jew, I believe in the miracle of Mount Sinai. This is when God revealed to man, using Moses as his prophet and the children of Israel as his messengers, the moral and ethical blueprint for how to exist and how to order your life. It talked about relations between nations, relations between people. It separated the good from the evil, the sacred from the profane. And I think that it is something that because of the ministry of Jesus was translated to and was made available to much of the world. In fact, in a way, all of the world. In a way, in the small c, we're all Christian now because we have all embraced the Torah, or Judeo-Christian. So, in that sense, I think that Judaism and Christianity are essentially consistent. Now, whether or not Jesus was the Messiah, that's a question that's up to Christians to decide. I'm not going to comment on that. But I think that the important thing in my way of thinking is that we've all embraced that which has been identified as the good, both in faith and in science, I may add. And to, I suppose, bring it back to the Noahide covenant, that is, I think, 7 principles that are in the Torah, that were derived through the Talmud and the rabbis as applying to all of mankind. Now, anti-Semites misinterpret this to say, oh, this is an attempt by the Jews to control the world. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with 7 basic principles of ethics that are identified in nature. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not steal. You shall separate powers in government. In other words, it sets up a means by which we should govern ourselves by having a separate judiciary, a separate body of judgment that would not be corrupted by the political powers. Don't be cruel to animals. I mean, these are basics. It gives a basic constitution for all of us to voluntarily look at and try to incorporate because it's true, both from a faith standpoint, but also from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah, very interesting. And I mean, theoretically, any system where you have an identifiable, bad, you're like, okay, there is a satanic force and it operates through people in groups of people, and it's like, okay, I've identified them. And okay, being Jewish, like theologically, you have Marcionian in the ancient times that identified our God as satanic, and as opposed to the God of love. And but it's very common within any religious, cosmological, theological system to say there's a bad force and it operates through people, and then to even claim that you've correctly identified the people that this evil force is operating through, and then even the God forbid the consequence of that being that you have to stop these people. So saying that as an operating cosmological system, it's very common. And any system could do that, and even the human tendency when just thinking about evil is to operate is like, oh, of course there's Satan, a bad influence, and like you could identify him, and it's these people that are operating, as opposed to saying it's a universal force that equally affects all people, or a matter of free will, like a series of decisions. So you mentioned Freemasonry and Illuminati, and your opinions on Christianity. You could take a Judeo approach that generally Freemasonry is superior religion to Christianity. It suffers less of the flaws in terms of Judaism than Christianity. And historically, many rabbis and Jews have been Freemasons and Jews at the same time, including Orthodox, and it's disputed in rabbinic literature, even whether the becoming a Freemason, but that you have secret societies and groups, they're easier to subvert, so to say, like that if there's a group of people that start acting bad, in Judeo literature, usually it's a series of bad decisions. Like I told the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, and the guy who just forgot to wash his hands once before eating bread, and from there became a horrible sinner. That, usually is like Perky Avos says, anytime you do a good deed, it creates a good angel, and anytime we do a bad deed, it creates a bad angel, and that's just how karma works. That Satan is the natural product of our bad deeds that causes these forces. But so I don't know if you want to make any comment on certainly the dangers of of saying, okay, there's a satanic force and it could operate through people,
Mhm.
and then saying, okay, like, well, a lot of people agree about that, but what they disagree about is who is good and bad. In any really historically, almost all conflict, there's mere opinions of both sides of the conflict, where one side thinks that they're on the side of good and God, and the other side is on the side of Satan, and the other side thinks the opposite. And it's like, then the question is it a battle of my God versus your God? And or say, are you not worried about the concept? You say it's a true concept that even if people misidentify or misinterpret, that's the natural way, part of free will, but it's just a true concept that satanic conspiracies do overtake groups of men and cause us collectively to ruin society.
Well, first of all, Doovid, I mean, I think that no religion is perfect, because we are basically, religions are made up of people, and people are imperfect, and that there are imperfect elements that can become marbled into any religion or any society. And I think that each religion, in a sense, can be judged on its own merits, whether or not it promotes things that are true because they are beneficial to the advancement of human civilization and freedom and the sovereign individual under God, or whether they don't. And that, it is a complex question. Now, as far as Masonry goes, Masonry very well may embrace some very good principles, but the problem I have with it is that it is a secret society, so we can't know what's going on, and that as such, it is more prone to being infiltrated by and corrupted by satanic forces, which I think historically did happen with regard to the Illuminati. Now, I get into that in my book, and I show how none other than George Washington knew about this and commented about it. That basically the Illuminati, which I think had the same corrupting influence on Christianity that the Shabtai Zvi and the Sabbateans had on Judaism around the same time, a little bit before that, it is one that infiltrated the otherwise good and honorable Masonic lodges of Europe. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone's involved who was involved with Masonry, at least not in the outer portico, are part of this. I mean, let's not forget that it was a Masonic-like organization that launched the Boston Tea Party. You need a certain level of secrecy in order to accomplish some things that are good. But the problem is that when it becomes very institutional, and when it is infiltrated at its core by those who may not have the best intentions and who are possibly seeking to subvert society, which is what the Illuminati did do, then you have a satanic influence. And that I would just also say that I have a problem with organizations that require an oath of loyalty in secret, and that I republish in this book the standard oath that one takes for when becoming a Mason. And it is that you're swearing loyalty to the lodge over everything else, including your country, your family, even yourself. And I have a problem with that. I mean, I would never take an oath like that. I mean, I've only taken, as I said, 2 oaths in my life. The first one is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And the second is the oath to my wife in marriage. Other than that, I'm not going to take a secret oath that would require that I'm loyal to anyone over those things.
We didn't have a bar mitzvah?
I had a bar mitzvah. I don't know. Is that an oath? It's an oath to God. Is there an oath involved in a bar mitzvah? It's to
well, I'm saying you could consider getting called to the Torah an oath that we affirm, Asher Bakar Banu, Mikolam in Nasalanu Taurus MS, that God chose us from all the nations and gave us the Torah. I mean, it's a blessing, but it's an affirmation that when you had your bar mitzvah, that you affirmed, at least possibly an oath, that we are chosen from all the nations and we were given the Torah, which is true. That's what's said when you're called from the Torah and after getting the Torah. And you could consider that an oath that the last time you had an aliyah at synagogue, you affirmed that God chose the Jewish people and gave us the Torah, which is true.
Yeah, I would say that's an oath. It's an acknowledgement of something that is both spiritual and historical. I mean, I suppose that the Shema Yisrael is an oath.
It's not the same as like a Masonic oath where you say, "Here I avow, this," and even a direct statement, of secrecy, where you're giving a general affirmation
Right.
that the Torah of Moses is true, and which presumably means everything included in it is true. That might include also the same things that secrecy at penalty of death. If you're like Adam Green, something like that, where it's like, I read your books, and here on page 2001, it says that like there is a penalty of death for giving out secrets, and that when you had your bar mitzvah, that you did affirm to everything in Moses as true, even though Moses talks much more about charity and kindness and being nice to the stranger, widow, and orphan. But in theory, even if you're a atheist or Reformed Jew, that it is somewhat an oath of affirmation and everything that's included within the tradition of Moses. They're just interesting.
I understand. I mean, I suppose you're right in that. I mean, I do take an oath upon my bar mitzvah that I accept the moral and ethical precepts of the Torah. I mean, I suppose if we really want to get technical, I did take the Cub Scout oath, right? I mean, I
was a Cub. Well, I was saying these are all Masonic, largely organizations like the Cub Scouts, and any. So I mean, if you wanted to look at it as
nothing secretive about
Noahide in intention, that I was saying there has to be secret like professionalism. I mean, it's okay, like my
right. I mean,
father's a doctor, my mother's a lawyer.
Yeah.
And they have professional responsibility to not reveal the information of their clients.
Of course.
Or they could lose their profession. And, I studied to be a rabbi, and actually clerical privilege is probably the strongest privilege under the law, that it's much more difficult to force information from a cleric than even a doctor,
right,
or a lawyer, or
yeah, but that's not a loyalty oath. I mean, look, I took an oath in a sense when I worked for a certain company that asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I mean, that's, you're basically voluntarily entering into a relationship where you're saying, I'm going to protect the proprietary interests of this company. So yeah, I mean, I suppose if we want to broaden the definition, I mean, a priest and his confessor, there's an oath of secrecy there. Client, lawyer-client privilege is secrecy.
So is it always satanic, or could the, no. Kabbalistically, a lot of times the structure that evil works is the exact same structure that good works. So that if you have the reason why these societies are secret largely is because they wouldn't get away with it if everybody knew that these public figures are all in on something and meet somewhere, and they're doing it because it benefits them collectively, and the reason people don't fall for it is because they don't know. And if they knew that they were all in on it together, obviously they'd put a stop to it. But then at the same time, you like satanic or righteous. Like, is it possible that that you say no, we're enlightened people, and we need to conspire in order to because that's just the way things work.
Well, we might need.
And it's a righteous. Are you saying any conspiring is satanic?
No, I'm not.
In nature, are you saying
I just mentioned that, like, for example, the Boston Tea Party, which I thought was a good thing, was hatched by the Sons of Liberty, which was a secret society that was developed on Masonic lines, and that was good. So I'm not
only worked. I would say it would have only worked through a secret society. There's no way
to
successfully have a revolution if people know who you are.
Look, you needed secrecy among certain offices to try to kill Hitler. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to have secrecy. That's part of functioning. Like the family has certain immunities and secrecies within it.
Well, I mean, there are interpretations of religion. You're saying no, when you're on the side of good, there's a supernatural force to protect you. That Moses, God tells Moses to go into Paro, and he doesn't need a conspiracy. He's on the side of God, and he's able to just walk straight into Paro's office and give him, God's message. Even in Judaism,
you might need conspiracy to overthrow evil. I'm pointing out that
when I'm saying that means that an argument that is saying that truth in truth, the ends does not justify the means. For the
No.
satanic conspiracy, the ends justifies the means. So if you're on the side of truth, you're not going to use a conspiracy because the ends doesn't justify the means for truth. And that's a dispute among scholars, even in Judaism, and probably most traditions. That level of is the side of good also allowed for the ends to justify the means, or is that the difference of what it means to be good, that the ends never justify the means?
No, I mean, you can, the ends can justify the means in the service of good. I mean, as I mentioned, a conspiracy, and it was a conspiracy if you were a Nazi, to overthrow Hitler was hatched in secret, and they tried to carry it out. That was a conspiracy, so I suppose that in that case, a conspiracy depends upon the eye of the beholder. I'm simply pointing out that there is a broader conspiracy that in the modern times started with the Illuminati and with the Sabbatean movement in Judaism that does seek evil and that is trying to overthrow the good and that has infiltrated otherwise good organizations. We don't know what they are because it's secret, but we can begin to understand and discern it using reason and being able to identify that which is contrary to not only our own self-interest, but against human nature in general. And I think that the modern manifestation of this did start on May 1st, 1776, when Adam Weishaupt.
Rabbi Adam Weishaupt or Adam Weishaupt?
Adam Weishaupt.
You don't call him rabbi.
No, he is no rabbi. He was actually.
I don't know the conspiracy that if he was connected to the Rothschilds, and even if you defended it, say that I've met plenty of people that are pro Illuminati. I mean, and saying that it's a popular movement.
I'm sure you have.
And
by the way, he came. I think the Rothschilds actually started to develop their family banking and business after.
It was a method to unify Europe. And I mean, it might have been conspiratorial in terms of usurping titles, but I mean, if it wasn't for Rabbi Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, that and they weren't able to centralize certain forms of power, you wouldn't have had the electric grid and railroads that were largely by Rothschild.
I disagree.
But there were good things that came out of it, like the infrastructure that allowed for railroads and electric grids. Maybe it couldn't have. They were saying that no, it required Rabbi the Illuminati in order to unify Europe enough for the. Well, that's your opinion.
That is my opinion. Yeah, I think that the Illuminati, based upon the papers that were seized by the Bavarian authorities and that were published by Abbe Baruel in Notes to Jacobinism, were to overthrow all clerical and political and monarchical power in Europe. As
the changing of the priestly class
as the first step toward creating a one world government. Now, look,
I was saying overflow and peaceful transfer, largely
not
of
overthrow,
the priestly class.
No,
it was through a secret organization to change the nature of the priestly class in Europe.
Not change it, overthrow it, and abolish it in the favor of a collectivist,
in favor of a new priestly class.
The
old guard went out and a new guard comes in.
Yeah, but the point of the Illuminati ultimately was to change human nature in a way that the blueprint was further codified in 1848 by Karl Marx, who worked for the secretive organization called the League of the Just. Many conspiracy theorists believe that was the Illuminati and a continuation of it, and that was to abolish ultimately all earthly authority by creating a new kind of a man, a new collectivist international beehive, where there would be no more cleric, there would be no more authority, there would be no more God, there would be no more morality, no more religion, no more family. Everything would be de facto equal, that we would all become part of a gigantic automatic ant colony. We would have sacrificed our individual minds because those created inequality. And the ultimate virtue in that world was equality de facto, that everything would have to become one. In a sense, it is a reenactment of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that, did that have something to do with creating uniformal railroads between nations? Not really. I mean, I think nations cooperating with each other out of self-interest could develop means to advance technologies and communication. You don't need world government to do that.
Well, no, I mean, you did because you needed the banking to finance the infrastructure. I'm saying that the Illuminati and Rabbi Adam Weishaupt and the Rothschilds created the infrastructure esoterically that allowed Europe to create its construction, its civil engineering infrastructure. And like the Romans, maybe in ancient time, but no, I mean, for 1,000 years, Europe couldn't create a central infrastructure, and it wasn't the Holy Roman Church or the Protestant Revolution. It was Rabbi Adam Weishaupt and the Rothschilds and finance new vehicles of finance methods that was able to create the infrastructure of the electric grid and the railroads.
Adam was not a rabbi. He was a devout. He was a Catholic. I don't know if he's a devout, but he was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University in Munich. I don't think he was a Jew. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that. We have to look that up.
Look it up. He was
questions. Well, I would say it's disputed his identity.
In fact, the Illuminati did not allow Jews until after the French Revolution. I mean, they were not. They were basically trying to subvert the Christian West by means of subverting already existing Masonic lodges, which had the structure.
I mean, they didn't allow Jews by religion. They allowed Jews who had converted to Christianity.
That's right.
But Masons, you could be a Jew. I mean, historically, Freemasonry, it's questionable at what period Jews became Freemasons, and is it possible 500 years ago there were also Freemasons across Europe that had Jews as member, or whether the majority of Freemasons were Christian organizations, and there's quite a few material.
No, I mean, there's a lot. Look, there's a huge body of work on that. I didn't, my brief pamphlet doesn't touch on very much of that. I mean, my understanding generally, broadly, is that the Masonic movement finds its roots in the Knights Templar, which came out of the Crusades. And in fact, one of the main heroes of their movement is Jacques de Molay, who was head of the Knights Templars in Paris, and who was executed for that.
I'm not initiated in any realm, but generally I self-identify as a Freemason because I've read the literature of some of the greatest minds in history, and a lot of them were Freemasons, like Newton and Washington.
George Washington was. I get that.
But I'm saying you generally interpret Freemason, even like Vince Bruno, who agrees that, as an attack, that Freemasonry is a proto-Noahide movement. That generally Freemasonry is actually the organization of Noahides. And even within Freemasonry, there's self-identified, rites and rituals that include becoming a Noahide or a guardian of Noahide, although there's other added stuff in. But you could have a largely pro-Freemasonic approach, whether you're saying, okay, they're secretive, there's definitely bad things, there are a lot of so I mean, if you get back to the question we talked earlier, if you're using kind of the Illuminati, God forbid, just like an easy punching bag, or are you talking about this added extra force? So it's like, of course, that wealthy people try to be corrupt and acquire more power, and they're willing to, God forbid, let the masses suffer and die in order to increase their own power. That's a natural inclination upon all men at all times to do the wrong thing. Or are you saying that there's some sort of added, if spiritual or some sort of force that caused these people to be worse than they would have been naturally?
I'm saying that the satanic influence has historically and continues to use the cloak of secretism, secret societies, to advance its agenda, that the Masonry may have some very good principles involved in it. I think George Washington was a great God-fearing Christian, and he was a Mason in a sense. I don't think he was devoutly involved in Masonry, but he was involved in it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I also point out, and I republish in this short book, a letter that Washington sent to a parishioner who pointed out to him and who sent him a copy of Robeson's book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, which exposed the fact that the Illuminati had infiltrated Masonry and that the Illuminati was, as he called it, quote unquote, diabolical, which is a term used for Satan, and that Washington, in this letter, which I republish, acknowledges this. He said that in his opinion, it had not infiltrated his lodge in the United States, but at the same time, he was very aware of it, and he was very convinced of its diabolical nature, and that he understood that they did have influence in American secret societies. Now, this isn't to condemn all secret societies. This isn't to condemn some of the principles that Masonry has embraced. This is simply to point out that there are dangers associated with these secret societies, and that those dangers have reached a very high and critical level now because of modern technologies. I would argue that organizations like the
You put on top like Ben Franklin, saying like, okay, you should be skeptical of all structures of power and all times when power is centralized.
You should be, but
you should be even more skeptical when power is centralized among secret societies.
Yes, you should be. Although I would point out that Franklin, I think, was involved in secret societies before the Illuminati. And I think that it was at a time when Masonry actually was productive. It was involved with industry and the development of internal structures and canals and science. And, the American Philosophical Society, which Benjamin Franklin founded before the American Revolution, was a great organization that involved promoting the national interest. You can judge them based upon, it's like Jesus said.
But you're not going to let me defend the positive things that come from the Illuminati. You're saying that there is a lot of positive fruit that came from the Illuminati.
I'm saying that the Illuminati didn't infiltrate those lodges to the degree that it may have until after Franklin. I mean, the Illuminati was 1776. That was the year that the Declaration of Independence was declared in the United States. Franklin set up the American Philosophical Society in 1759, 60, around that time. So I don't think that they were influenced by it based upon the historical timeline. I don't think that Washington's lodge was yet infiltrated. I don't know if it ever has been, but when Washington said that he didn't believe that it was, I take that as truth. I mean, I think he was sincere, because you take a look at the sum total of his life, and he was still clearly one of the greatest men in history. I mean, I don't think he was involved in that kind of an embrace. I think that kind of embrace was always there. And my thesis is that it has reached a point today where it has taken the high ground in many areas in the world and in the United States, in areas of economy, in areas of business, in areas of academia and culture, and even in areas of religion. And that we ought to be able to identify it, because that's our job as sovereign citizens and as images of God, to identify the satanic influence and to identify the satanic conspiracy. That's why I wrote this book, because it's a brief, let me hold it up.
I'll read straight from your
It is a brief
here.
manual, really, on how to see Satanism when it's in front of you, and how to identify it and how to call it out. That's our job as sovereign citizens. That's our job as images of God. We should all try to play our part in doing that, if we're to have a free life and if we're to have a moral society.
Let me read a little bit from your conclusion.
Sure.
And Ricardo here is paying money for me to question you on Christianity. Even another $5 that he's if Chuck thinks Jesus is the most admirable person who ever lived, then why hasn't he converted to Christianity? Something doesn't smell kosher here. So maybe we'll save this for a different time. But this man's paying money out of his own pocket for me to try to pester you on why you don't convert to Christianity. But he's one of our longest fans and listeners. And, so we talk about that maybe a different time. So let me read some of Charles' conclusion here. Satan is everywhere. Satan is both inside and outside of us. Satan permeates our past, our present, and our future. Satan is the force that draws us away from God. And because we are imperfect images of God and we are not God, we often find ourselves caught in the middle of two centrifugal forces. Satan is the anti-God because Satan is false and God is true. While God is self-evident, Satan is the great deceiver who reels us in with irresistible power and magnetism and who dazzles us with lies that are so slick and so powerful that we often find them hard to detect. Our purpose in life as individuals and the hallmark of our character is to know God and to reject Satan, to know truth and reject falsehood, to know virtue and reject vice. Indeed, while we cannot know all things because we are not God, we can nevertheless know enough about existence and morality, and we can know enough about God to reject Satan, both in our own lives and within our societies. And a little more, but as I mentioned, local here in Detroit, Rabbi Babayev, and we studied Talmud for a few years. And we would, I even worked for him. He owned property, and his son had a clothing business, and we would repeat to each other the statement in the Talmud, in order to strengthen each other, that said, the Yetzer Hara never takes a break, never takes a vacation, and every time you defeat it, it comes back stronger. And to have somewhat like righteous friendships is to recognize, like, yes, there is this force that if you don't do anything, will naturally win. That it takes our personal effort to defeat it, and you need the help of peers and friends and scholars and scripture and religion and various things in order to defeat this force. And even societally, when we're trying to have to be careful, like labeling, God forbid, to label people as having a negative force behind them, be extremely careful and cautious, but to see also that it's an important role in history. And yes, we do have to be careful that collectively we're headed the wrong direction, and then looking at what's happening around the world and in current events to see, yes, basically what happened is sin got a better hold, probably started with individuals who made small bad decisions that led up to really bad decisions, that led up to groups of people collectively making bad decisions, to somehow society as a whole being bent more towards bad than good, unfortunately, that those people become our representatives and in charge of us, God forbid. So it's one of the most extremely important topics, Psalm 34, turn away from bad and do good, that generally the classical vision is first you have to avoid Satan and then do good. The Hasidic approach tries to reverse it and says do good and then avoid bad. But classically, in a Mosaic portrait, you have to do good and bad, but you can't really do good if you don't avoid bad. So appreciate your book. I think we got 20 viewers. I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to cover, or if you just want to give your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Doooovid. And the only thing I'd add to that in the process of identifying evil is prayer. Prayer could mean just spending 5 minutes a day, or suddenly, it might fall upon you unexpectedly in the course of a day, where you have a very crystalline understanding of your own purpose in life and of what is real, and to develop a certain ability to experience that whenever possible. We can know truth and we can identify truth to a very high degree, but we have to let ourselves know the truth. And that takes reflection. It takes study. It takes hard work. It takes the ability to develop skills of reason. It takes education. And then it doesn't just grow on trees. Freedom and liberty are not concepts that just come out of the ground. You have to fight for them. You have to struggle for them, just like you have to struggle against the Yetzer Hara. This is part of the human experience. We are imperfect beings, and we live in a world that we're surrounded by temptations to bring us away from knowledge and away from God and the Spirit. So we struggle to find a balance and to move our own lives forward, and in the process, hopefully, move our societies forward by having the courage to do our part. Everyone can have something they can do to contribute to finding the truths of the universe and of their own society and their own life. My part, your part, Doooovid, is doing these broadcasts, but everybody finds their way. So I urge people to find that in themselves, basically.
And one of our regular listener, Ricardo, dropping almost $20 in super chats. Appreciate that. and like he has to remain hidden. Sometimes like Charles with talking the broadcast that the righteous, if in your own opinion, might have to be hidden because falsehood is the commonality. So things like vaccines or election fraud or certain topic that, like, yes, if you do want to talk about these things, you put yourself in danger if you're not anonymous. So you say like the tendency even for people who are trying trying to do the right thing to need to remain anonymous. Oswald Spengler has been watching us for months. Also wants Charles' opinion of Anton Lavey and Aleister Crowley. You mentioned Crowley in the book. I don't remember if you mentioned Anton Lavey, but if you want to briefly comment on that, it's one of our regular listeners.
I actually have a guest coming on my show Wednesday at 12 noon who's just written a new book about Aleister Crowley. Certainly one of the great evil individuals of modern times. He influenced a lot of the negative elements of the counterculture.
Is Led Zeppelin, and does that mean like Led Zeppelin and Ozzy Osbourne are satanic?
Yeah. No, maybe not, but they certainly were influenced by Crowley. A lot of this idea, which is natural and is a dark element in all of us, and we all have to be careful. This anarchistic idea of overthrowing the order, and they play with that, and that's dangerous. And it's like fire. It's a very dangerous substance. But look, it's something that needs to be recognized as just part of our nature that we need to curb and control. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that those guys are satanic.
Okay. Well, Oswald follows you on social media, so hopefully he'll catch that stream, and we'll keep on doing our Thursday Partner in Torahs. And I enjoy your program and just shedding more information. And for me, I don't like to put too much time into politics or various things because I'm more scientifically minded, and that could take up all your time. But just your work to research history and put it out, and then even if I disagree with some of your assessments, that you frame it in a certain way that makes it easier to understand, at least from people who generally believe in like a cosmic battle between good and bad, where collectively, like the Mishnah says, Maimonides, we're required to believe, not even supposed to, required to believe that everything is on a 50-50 scale, and it's my personal decision that could turn humanity towards the better or worse. That my personal battle with my own Yetzer Hara, as the big guys, the people in power, or collectively the scales of humanity, and looking like the nature of prayer that okay, I'm going to do my part and fight my Yetzer Hara and pray to God, and that miraculously that somehow if I do the right thing, that God could cause everyone to do the right thing, which interesting and keeps these conversations interesting. So I'll let you conclude, and then we'll end the show.
Thanks a lot, David. And we'll be doing our usual Partners in Torah Thursday at 1 p.m. Live on my channel, which is Charles Moscowitz Live on YouTube. And I've got all these other subscribing platforms. Check out my book, The Satanic Conspiracy. There it is. Thank you very much. Available at Amazon Books. Doovid, I'll talk to you then. And thank you very much, Doovid, for having me on today. I really always enjoy talking with you. It's always very interesting and deep. And I think we get into some really important issues from we don't always agree, but it's a chance to
it's only interesting because we have the tendency to disagree. I mean, there are small philosophical differences where we see the world differently that cause us to have at least minor disagreements on almost every issue, and that's what keeps it interesting. And like I really want to write a book, and I admire your ability to keep on writing books. And obviously, you could be a PhD and spend your whole lifetime trying to cover this topic, but you did a nice job of the important overview in what people need to know about this, and just that people should be thinking about these things. And it's just good to accomplish. Like you're a man, you could be retiring or doing other things, and you're still writing books. So I definitely commend you for that, and look forward to Thursday. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, David.